So thank you all for being here today. I'm a fifth year in the marketing division, and this is my project, Counterfactual Culpability. Thinking about what you could have done increases felt culpability for your actions. So I study trade-off decisions, and what's really important and interesting about trade-offs is that each of the options has both a cost and a benefit, and each option favors a different value. So it's not clear what is definitely the better of the options. So for example, currently in society, we have the COVID-19 vaccine, and policymakers need to decide if there should be vaccine mandates. On one hand, a mandate limits the spread of the virus, but on the other hand, mandates limit personal freedom. So I study trade-off decisions in a number of business and policy contexts. And we as actors, we act on trade-offs all the time, but sometimes we make our own decision of which option to act on. And at other times, we're told what to do by someone else, and we're simply following orders. And so what I'm really interested in is how does making your own decision versus following orders influence how you feel about the outcome of these trade-offs? More specifically, how responsible, guilty, and regretful will you feel for the outcome? And I conceptualize these three constructs under one sort of umbrella feeling of culpability. So in my previous research with my co-authors, Sonia Kim and Janet Metcalf, we studied this question in the context of programming autonomous vehicles. And what we found was super surprising. We found that actually not making the decision oneself, so having it decided by a superior, increased feelings of culpability. And so in today's project, I really want to dig deeper into why this is happening. Why does having low agency, just following orders, lead to greater culpability? And I had two hypotheses. The first, that acting against one's personal or political beliefs increases culpability. And the second, that engaging in counterfactual thinking increases culpability. So due to time, I'm just going to show one experiment. And this experiment was run a little over a year ago when the big question in society was, how was the 2020 school year going to look? Was it going to look like the picture on the left, or was it going to look like the picture on the right? And policymakers had to make this really tough decision. So I asked participants, imagine that you're a superintendent of a school district. And as superintendent, you need to implement a policy of either online or in-person school. So they read about the pros and the cons of each of these two policy options, and then they were randomized into one of two conditions. So either they had high agency, and they were told that as superintendent, they needed to choose and implement one of the two options, and I asked for their choice. In the other condition, they had low agency, and they were told that the governor of their state issued a mandate that all schools needed to either be in person or online, and this was randomized amongst low agency participants. They then read about a negative outcome of the policy that they implemented. And then I asked for their feeling of culpability for that negative outcome of their actions. So my hypothesis was that acting against one's, in this case, political beliefs increases culpability. And I knew that this question of should schools be online or in person was highly politically polarized. So I asked for their political affiliation. And with both the policy they implemented and their political affiliation, I create a new variable that I call belief action. So this matrix explains belief action. So if you're a Democrat, and you implemented an online policy, you have a belief action match. And if you implemented a Democrat and implemented in person, you have a belief action mismatch. And the opposite was true for Republicans. So I have two factors, agency, high or low, and belief action match versus mismatch. And what I find is two main effects. First, I find that those who had low agency, just followed orders, had higher culpability. So this replicates the previous finding. But more importantly, for this experiment, I find that in both low agency and high agency, if you acted against your political party's beliefs, you felt more culpable. So a mismatch between beliefs and actions increases felt culpability. So for the second hypothesis, engaging in counterfactual thinking increases culpability. So counterfactual thinking occurs when you act against the normative behavior. So if you have a normal commute home from work and one day you deviate, you're going to have more thoughts about that normal commute. So if you have a belief-action mismatch, you acted against your political beliefs, and that's going to increase thoughts about the normative beliefs action. So increased thoughts about the outcome would have been better if I had implemented the other policy. So this is upward counterfactual thinking. And I predicted that this would mediate the relationship between a mismatch between beliefs and actions and felt culpability. And the mediation was significant. So I can say that this counterfactual thinking is what's driving, what's underlying the relationship between acting against one's beliefs and feeling culpable. So that's all we have time for today. I'd love to take questions. If we don't have time, you can also send them to me offline.
Thank you so much, Maayan. We do have a couple minutes to take questions. So if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Maayan. I thought that was super interesting. I had a quick question. So who were the people that you were interviewing? Yeah.
So in the data set that I showed you just now, it was MTurkers. I ran another experiment about the same question of in-person versus online, where I actually collected responses from parents who had to make this decision for their own child. And we find similar results between sort of the more anonymous MTurker population, as well as a population of people that really had this decision was extremely important to them personally.
Makes sense.
And really interesting. I just had a follow-up question to that. So do you give like monetary incentives because then that can bias their responses, right? Either way, or do you think that doesn't play a role here?
Monetary incentives to participate in the experiment in general, or based on what they choose? So the MTurkers were paid, I believe, 75 cents to take this survey. And the parents who had taken it in a separate study, they simply did it on a volunteer basis. And we see similar results. So I don't think that the monetary incentive changed how they felt.